Welcome to Unassailable, where truth reigns supreme, a show designed to blow apart false narratives. Aren't you tired and fed up of all the lies that are constantly being fed to you? Unassailable is all about exposing the truth, no matter how uncomfortable or inconvenient it may be. Join me in boldly digging deep into important issues, busting myths, and bringing clarity to the confusion. Unafraid to ask the tough questions, and unafraid to give you the truthful answers you deserve. It's time to unleash the truth, expose the lies, and obliterate false narratives with an unassailable force. This is Unassailable.
But within ye are full of hypocrisy and iniquity. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because ye build the tombs of the prophets, and garnish the sepulchres of the righteous, and say, If we had been in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. Wherefore ye be witnesses unto yourselves, that ye are the children of them which killed the prophets. Fill ye up then the measure of your fathers. Ye serpents, ye generation of vipers, how can ye escape the damnation of hell? Wherefore behold,
I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
And there was no place for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was thrown out, the ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the one who deceives the whole world. He was thrown to earth, and his angels with him, the accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been thrown down. They conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they did not love their lives to the point of death. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you with great fury, because he knows his time is short.
Take no part in the worthless deeds of evil and darkness. Instead, expose them. It is shameful even to talk about the things that ungodly people do in secret, but their evil intentions will be exposed when the light shines on them, for the light makes everything visible. Wake up, O sleeper, and rise up from the dead. Some of you guys won't believe it even if you see it. So, I have a saying, if you don't trust your eyes, at least respect your ears. So I'm going to read this to you, diseases and peculiarities of the Negro race. And I want you to be thinking about how these still apply through social constructs in sociology or psychology or practices and policies. Where are they embedded and how they impact you in the narrative about you to this date? To run away. It is unknown to our medical authorities, although its diagnostic symptom, the absconding from service, is well known to our planters and overseers. In noticing a disease not heretofore classed among the long list of maladies that man is subject to, it was necessary to have a new term to express it. The cause in the most of cases that induces the Negro to run away from service is as much a disease of the mind as any other species of mental alienation, and much more curable as a general rule. With the advantages of proper medical advice strictly followed, this troublesome practice that many Negroes have of running away can be almost entirely prevented, although the slaves be located on the borders of a free state within a stone's throw of the abolitionists. If the white man attempts to oppose the deity's will by trying to make the Negro anything else than the submissive knee bender which the Almighty declared he should be, by trying to raise him to a level with himself, or by putting himself on an equality with the Negro, or if he abuses the power which God has given him over his fellow man by being cruel to him, or punishing him in anger, or by neglecting to protect him from the wanton abuses of his fellow servants and all others, or by denying him the usual comforts and necessities of life, the Negro will run away. But if he keeps him in the position that we learn from the scriptures he was intended to occupy, that is, the position of submission, and if his masters or overseers be kind and gracious in his hearings towards him, without condensation, and at the same time ministers to his physical wants and protects him from abuses, the Negro is spellbound and cannot run away. Drapetomania, or the
I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven.
Rude and ungovernable and run away. On Mason and Dixon's line, two classes of persons were apt to lose their Negroes: those who made themselves too familiar with them, treating them as equals and making little or no distinction in regard to color, and on the other hand, those who treated them cruelly, denied them the common necessaries of life, neglected to protect them against the abuses of others, or frightened them by a blustering manner of approach, when about to punish them for misdemeanors. Before the Negroes run away, unless they are frightened or panic-struck, they become sulky and dissatisfied. The cause of this sulkiness and dissatisfaction should be inquired into and removed, or they are apt to run away or fall into the Negro consumption. When sulky and dissatisfied without cause, the experience of those on the line and elsewhere was decidedly in favor of whipping them out of it, as a preventative measure against absconding or other bad conduct. It was called whipping the devil out of them. According to my experience, the genuflexed, the awe and reverence must be exacted from them, or they will despise their masters.
That ancient snake called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angel,
if treated kindly, well fed and clothed, with fuel enough to keep a small fire burning all night, separated into families, each family having its own house, not permitted to run about at night, to visit their neighbors, to receive visits, or use intoxicating liquors, and not overworked or exposed too much to the weather, they are very easily governed, more so than any other people in the world. When all this is done, if any one or more of them at any time are inclined to raise their heads to a level with their master, humanity and their own good require that they should be punished until they fall into that submissive state which it is intended for them to occupy in all after time. When their progenitor received the name of Canaan, or submissive knee bender, they have only to be kept in the state and treated like children with care, kindness, attention, and humanity to prevent and cure them from running away. Dysphasia Ethiopica is a disease peculiar to Negroes, affecting both mind and body in a manner of well expressed by dysphasia, the name I have given it, as could be a single term.
for the accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been hurled down.
There's both mind and sensibility, but both seem to be difficult to reach by impressions from without. There is a partial insensibility of the skin, and so great a hebetude of the intellectual faculties, as to be like a person half asleep, that is, with difficulty aroused and kept awake. It differs from every other species of mental disease, as it is accompanied with physical signs or lesions of the body discoverable to medical observer, which are always present and sufficient to account for the symptoms. It is much more prevalent among free Negroes living in clusters by themselves than among slaves on our plantations, and attacks only such slaves as live like free Negroes in regard to diet, drinks, that have not got some white person to direct and take care of.
But woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury because he knows that his time is short.
To narrate its symptoms and effects among them would be to write a history of the ruins and dilapidation of Haiti and every spot of earth that have ever had uncontrolled possession over for any length of time. I propose only to describe its symptoms among slaves. From the careless movements of the individuals affected with the complaint, they are apt to do much mischief, which appears as if intentional, but it mostly owing to the stupidness of mind and insensibility of the nerves induced by the disease. Thus they break waste and destroy everything they handle, abuse horses and cattle, tear, burn, or rend their own clothing, and paying no attention to the rights of property, steal others to replace what they have destroyed. They wander about at night and keep in a half-nodding sleep during the day. They slight their work, cut up corn, cane, cotton, or tobacco when hoeing it, as if for pure mischief. They raise disturbances with their overseers and fellow servants without cause or motive, and seem to be insensible to pain when subjected to punishment. The fact of the existence of such a complaint, making man like an automaton or senseless machine, having the above or similar symptoms, can be clearly established by the most direct and positive testimony. That it should have escaped the attention of medical profession can only be accounted for because its attention has not been sufficiently directed to the maladies of the Negro race. Otherwise, a complaint of so common an occurrence on badly governed plantations, and so universal among free Negroes or those who are not governed at all, a disease eradicated in physical lesions and having its particular and well-marked symptoms and its curative indications would not have escaped the notice of the profession. The northern physicians and people have noticed the symptoms, but not the disease from which they spring. They ignorantly attribute the symptoms to the debasing influence of slavery on the mind without considering that those who have never been in slavery, or their fathers before them, are the most afflicted and the latest from the slave-holding South the least. The disease is the natural offspring of Negro liberty. The liberty to be idle, to wallow in filth, and to indulge in improper food and drink. DeBow's Review, Southern and Western States. And there you have it, people. This was and still is embedded as scientific. It affects laws. It affects the way people perceive us. It affects practices, policies. You think about it.
I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven.
This elemental parody of the master's religion, Jesus, the gospel, the Bible, are all mixed together. Look at this. Africa instead of Palestine, the ocean instead of the Red Sea, slave ships and sharks instead of Romans, Egyptians, and so on. Here the plantation, instead of Golgotha, represents the place of Jesus' agony. And instead of Herod, the master with crosses, flagellations, and other delights.
What do the masters say to that? Does it or does it not prove they have souls?
The best person to answer that is the most eminent scientific authority of the day, Professor Samuel Cartwright.
Samuel Cartwright was a medical doctor who was born in Fairfax County, Virginia. Cartwright attended the University of Pennsylvania Medical School, and he spent some time in Europe, and he received many awards and quite a bit of recognition for his work. Later in his career, he became a surgeon under General Andrew Jackson, and worked on behalf of the Confederacy up into his death. But in terms of his practice, he practiced medicine primarily in the South, Alabama, Mississippi, and notably New Orleans, Louisiana. And he was considered a foremost expert in cholera, yellow fever, and sanitation, health, and maintenance. Now, cholera, as most of you already know, is an intestinal infection. Cartwright wrote quite a bit about cholera, about the symptoms of cholera, the attendant diarrhea, and that it was transmitted through contaminated water and food. The chief problem with cholera is that it causes extreme dehydration, which in turn causes mortality. Cartwright was also very, very interested in and did quite a bit of work on yellow fever. He had been faced with this illness in several venues. He understood it as a viral disease transmitted by mosquitoes. He understood the hemorrhaging aspects of it and the symptoms, which included fever, nausea, headache. But then there were some severe aspects of cholera, which included even organ failure, heart damage, etc., etc. So Cartwright had extensive understanding of some of the chief diseases and ailments that confronted people in the antebellum period. He spent quite a bit of time researching and writing, formulating clinical theories, which many people read and followed and studied. Cartwright was considered during his time an authority on African American health and medicine. He contributed quite a bit of literature to this area, and it was rooted in the idea of ultimately defending the institution of enslavement.
Now, behind the practice of race medicine is an understanding of racial diseases. Defining disease in racial terms has played an essential part in a biological strategy to legitimize the racial order. The notion of racial diseases, that people of different races suffer from peculiar diseases, or that they experience common diseases differently, okay? That idea is centuries old. Medicine served to mark blacks as deserving of their inferior social status in society. White slaveholders argued that the biological peculiarities of blacks made enslavement the only condition in which blacks could be productive and disciplined. The idea that enslaving African people was good for medical reasons, it was beneficial to black people, was a very powerful justification for slavery. Because we believe that scientists are investigating nature, the way things naturally are. We believe that the medical profession is working for the benefit of patients. So Dr. Samuel Cartwright, who was educated, trained at the University of Pennsylvania, was a very compelling promoter of slavery with his argument that slavery was good for black people's health. And he was an expert, the leading expert on Negro medicine. And his main argument was that black people had lower lung capacity, and so they had to be forced to work to be healthy. He also identified drapetomania as a disease that he said explained why some blacks would flee plantations. It was a mental disorder that caused them to do that, because if you were healthier as a slave, then you must have some mental disorder that would cause you to want to leave a condition that was good for you. And he wrote in a medical journal that it is the red vital blood sent to the brain that liberates their minds when under the white man's control, and it is the want of sufficiency of red vital blood that chains their minds to ignorance and barbarism when in freedom. Converting race into biological difference, Cartwright could ingeniously turn enslavement of Africans into a form of freedom and turn black freedom into slavery. After slavery ended, white scientists blamed the deteriorating health of the American Negro on the biological incapacity to adjust to freedom. A government psychiatrist, Era Evart, said, after he became, and this is in 1913, after he became a free man, the conditions under which he must continue his progress become indefinitely harder. Locating blacks' inferior status in their diseased bodies provided a reason for retaining white supremacy and discredited the need for radical social transformation. This was a reason to end Reconstruction, was that black people's bodies were not suited for emancipation, and it would be healthier for them to continue under the control of whites. So whites argued that the best way to improve the condition of emancipated blacks was through either benign neglect or coercive medical intervention. Now, just as whites explained the symptoms of black oppression as caused by disease, they explained black resistance to oppression as a symptom of disease. And this is, as you see, the drapetomania, that top disease that Cartwright identified. He coined this term. Drapetomania combines two Greek words, one for runaway slave and the other for crazy, to describe the mental disorder that caused blacks to flee plantations.
Remember, and I've written this, a healthy Negro is a good slave, and a bad slave is a sick Negro. For example, look at them. Their disease is drapetomania, or the mania to escape. They think only of escape, but not out of an idea of freedom, which is understandable in a human. The Negro doesn't have these sentiments. If he escapes only because he is sick.
We get our understanding of this antebellum concept of drapetomania under the topic of Negro slave diseases as one of Cartwright's major medical theories regarding African Americans. And drapetomania was the disease said to cause black people who were enslaved to want to free themselves, so that if a slave ran away, had thoughts of running away, wanted to escape bondage, they could be, under Cartwright's designation, diagnosed with drapetomania. And so he went further. He didn't just drop the term into the medical discussion, he actually elucidated the term. So he said that drapetomania was a mental disorder, that it was related to a form of mania or madness, and that a prescription for drapetomania would be to keep the enslaved persons in a submissive state, in an infantile state, if you will, and to keep them from running away. He went on to say that if they continue to have thoughts of freedom and thoughts of running away, another prescription is that they could be whipped, and this would be something of a cure. So in describing this theory of drapetomania, the desire of enslaved Africans to run away, Cartwright used and relied heavily on biblical scriptures and passages dealing with slavery. And so you'll find a lot of attention to drapetomania because in contemporary society, people tend to want to be free, or to believe that they want to be free. So the idea that one could be diagnosed with a disease for wanting freedom, and that great extension of democracy is interesting. Now, the second slave disease that we attributed to Cartwright would be diaesthesia ethiopica. This is a disease that was thought to also be one that affected the body and the mind, and it also had some other interesting attendant features. First of all, it was believed that it contributed to a lack of work ethic among enslaved Africans, so that if they didn't want to work, labor as slaves, then of course this is a disease. Overseers tended to label this as rascality. The idea that when an enslaved person acted out in protest of slavery, whether it be some form of perceived mischief or petty hostility, they were exhibiting signs of a disease. And this was ostensibly characterized by skin that was insensitive, and also it was considered a mental disability, that somehow the intellect was dulled as a result of diaesthesia ethiopica. And in one sense, Cartwright described it as the person appearing to be half asleep. Other symptoms of diaesthesia ethiopica included scars on the body. Also, Cartwright designated the disease as being much more prominent among free blacks, especially free blacks who lived together in their own enclaves, and that he suggested that free blacks were more subject to diaesthesia ethiopica than the slaves on the plantations, primarily because of the idea that the slaves on the plantation don't recognize freedom, don't understand the idea of freedom, and so therefore they were less likely to be stricken with this particular disease. You have the prevailing arguments and theories that advanced the support of slavery, the subjugation of blacks, in order to challenge the abolitionist movement. You have the desire for doctors to contribute to this pro-slavery argument in their search for scientific proof that slavery should be sustained. And then you also have this desire to expound upon or somehow extricate the psychological conditions of African Americans. And almost always, ultimately, the psychological determinations ended up in one destination, and that was in inferiority. Because Cartwright believed that black people as a whole were incapable of governing themselves, looking after themselves, working properly. Civilization wasn't even a notion. So this was part of the social context. Now, during the American Civil War, Cartwright, of course, joined the Confederate States of America, and he had the responsibility of improving the sanitation in the military camps in Vicksburg, in Mississippi, Port Hudson, Louisiana. And Cartwright was honored for his investigations, of course, into yellow fever and Asiatic cholera. In fact, one obituary for Cartwright stated that he left the world much better than he found it. So Samuel Cartwright, who would have been considered a doctor, having made credible contributions to the area of yellow fever and Asiatic cholera, was also a doctor who developed scientific medical racism in the antebellum period and can be very much considered an authority on African American health and medicine, work that has been debunked and decredited today, but work which probably more than anything gives us great insight into the racial mindset of the antebellum period and the desire to continue the enslavement of people of African descent.
These extraordinary creatures, neither man nor beast, that asked to be part of our world. There was older races, and yet until yesterday they'd never seen a wheel. And the future, they have no future, as they have no past. Tomorrow, as today, slavery will be their only possible privilege. What could they ever do if they don't live in the reflections of our glory and profit by the crumbs from our well-laden table?
In the Progress Psychosis, Jonathan Metzl traces how schizophrenia became a black disease in the 1960s. And here I want to point out that, again, we have this idea of racial diseases from slavery moving through the centuries, and I want to bring this a little closer to home to the 1960s and 70s, and just some striking examples of the practice of race medicine. So it became a black disease in the 1960s when psychiatrists began to explain black urban unrest as a symptom of mental instability. Schizophrenia was first considered a psychological malady that afflicted primarily white intellectual men and middle-class housewives. But the race of the disease morphed, just literally changed, again, before your eyes over the course of a decade as the civil rights movement erupted. Metzl writes that many leading medical and popular sources suddenly described schizophrenia as an illness manifested not by docility, which is how it had been described before when applied to whites, but by rage, and asserted that schizophrenia was a condition that afflicted Negro men, and that black forms of this illness were marked by volatility and aggression. In other words, if a black person has schizophrenia, it makes him hostile and aggressive. If a white person has it, it makes her, and it was mostly women, docile. In the 1960s, clerks literally crossed out the diagnosis of psychopathic personality on black patients' charts and replaced it with schizophrenia. And he shows these charts where it's the same patient But now schizophrenia is a black disease, so they cross out the old diagnosis and put in schizophrenia. It's the same patient, same symptoms. Conversely, the chart of a white woman originally diagnosed with schizophrenia paranoid type was changed to involutional melancholia. Black male accusations against the white power structure were diagnosed as signs of paranoia and hostility. Now, does that remind you of somebody? Maybe drapetomania, the Cartwright, saying that the symptom of blacks wanting to that blacks wanting to flee the plantation, resist enslavement, was a symptom of mental illness. Similarly here, black protest against white domination and injustice was seen as a mental illness, as a delusion. These men were described as delusional because they thought that white people were out to get them, basically.
There's more to be exposed. Laws and policies in the United States reflect deep-seated racist ideas that were once promoted by people like Cartwright. Data keeps showing that there's a disparate impact on Black people when it comes to health outcomes and access to care. Since the data is clear about the problem, why does it persist?
Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. Have nothing to do with the fruitless...
These disparities are rooted in this history that involves slavery, control by deprivation, structural harmful exploitation, and widespread hate of Black people, aka anti-Blackness or systemic racism. Even education systems in the United States also played a role and continue to play a role in perpetuating these bad ideas and narratives against Black people. Many schools still teach a version of history that minimizes or ignores the contributions of Black Americans, while also reinforcing damaging stereotypes and biases. Is that by accident? No, it's intentionally and willfully done.
It is shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret, but everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes a light.
Similarly, medical education curricula often fail to address or challenge the racist history amongst their students and faculty. In order to even look at these issues, it's crucial to acknowledge the truth, the role that pseudoscientific ideas and racism, anti-Blackness have played in shaping our healthcare systems and policies. Additionally, it's important that medical guidelines be established for medical education that would promote something different. But so far, not much has been done besides statements to debunk or say that Dr. Cartwright was not in agreement with today's values. But if the foundation be corrupt, what can man do?
Become sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you.
Telling the truth about the history of these racist ideas and practices in medicine, including the role of Samuel A. Cartwright and pseudoscientific theories like drapetomania, is essential. You cannot cover it up. People must know exactly what the bad root of something is in order to either change it or avoid it altogether. It allows us to confront the past and understand how these harmful ideas and practices continue to influence our lives today.
Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise.
There are several reasons why it is important and better to tell the truth rather than to cover it up or ignore this history. First, we have to acknowledge the role of racism in pseudoscience and medicine, and also look at how patients are treated today, Black patients in particular, and how it's based in this racist science and medical practice. By acknowledging the harm that has been done, and we also need to look at how we can have it rectified.
Making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil.
Healthcare providers can demonstrate their commitment to providing equitable and compassionate care, but do they? Have they even began that work? Okay. Then also uncovering the truth can help to spur action towards creating a more equitable healthcare system. And this is what the Black Panther Party was talking about with their Patients' Bill of Rights, with their sickle cell anemia clinics, with all of the things that they fought for with regards to the bad practices in medical treatment and medical care plans. All right. So we need to look at that and look at what was reasonable and rational, and why do people get killed for asking for those kinds of things? Do they really want to treat you with compassion and equity? It is impossible to continue to try and appeal to the better nature of your oppressor, who may not have a better nature, obviously, if we're still having this conversation. Then when you tell the truth about the history of these things in medicine and what is the ethical thing to do, we see that we are actually seeking medical treatment from people who might not have it in them to be ethical if these are the kinds of practices that they support and they know this history. Then why are we even looking to them as the medical, ethical, moral center? They don't have the moral compass that we seek, that is just, that is fair, and that is right. So in order to make it just, you have to make it right.
Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Unassailable. Return May 10th for more of the hard truth.
Blow the trumpet in Zion. Sound the alarm on my holy hill. Let all who live in the land tremble, for the day of the Lord is coming. It is close at hand. A day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and blackness. Like dawn spreading across the mountains, a large and mighty army comes, such as never was of old, nor ever will be in ages to come. Before them fire devours, behind them a flame blazes. Before them the land is like the Garden of Eden. Behind them a desert waste, nothing escapes them. They have the appearance of horses, they gallop along like cavalry. With a noise like that of chariots they leap over the mountain tops, like a crackling fire consuming stubble, like a mighty army drawn up for battle. At the sight of them nations are in anguish, every face turns pale. They charge like warriors, they scale walls like soldiers. They all march in line, not swerving from their course. They do not jostle each other, each marches straight ahead. They plunge through defenses without breaking ranks. They rush upon the city. They run along the wall. They climb into the houses like thieves. They enter through the windows. Before them the earth shakes. The sky trembles. The sun and moon are darkened, and the stars no longer shine. The Lord thunders at the head of his army. His forces are beyond number, and mighty are those who obey his command. The day of the Lord is great. It is dreadful. Who can endure it? Even now, declares the Lord, return to me with all your heart, with fasting and weeping and mourning. Rend your heart and not your garments. Return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and abounding in love, and he relents from sending calamity. Who knows? He may turn and have pity and leave behind a blessing, grain offerings and drink offerings for the Lord your God. Blow the trumpet in Zion, declare a holy fast, call a sacred assembly. Gather the people, consecrate the assembly, bring together the elders, gather the children, those nursing at the breast. Let the bridegroom leave his room, and the bride her chamber. Let the priests who minister before the Lord weep between the temple porch and the altar. Let them say, Spare your people, O Lord. Do not make your inheritance an object of scorn, a byword among the nations. Why should they say among the peoples, Where is their God? Then the Lord will be jealous for his land and take pity on his people. The Lord will reply to them, I am sending you grain, new wine, and oil, enough to satisfy you fully. Never again will I make you an object of scorn to the nations. I will drive the northern army far from you, pushing it into a parched and barren land, with its front columns going into the eastern sea, and those in the rear into the western sea. And its stench will go up, its smell will rise. Surely he has done great things. Be not afraid, O land, be glad and rejoice. Surely the Lord has done great things. Be not afraid, O wild animals, for the open pastures are becoming green. The trees are bearing their fruit. The fig tree and the vine yield their riches. Be glad, O people of Zion. Rejoice in the Lord your God, for he has given you the autumn rains in righteousness. He sends you abundant showers, both autumn and spring rains as before. The threshing floors will be filled with grain. The vats will overflow with new wine and oil. I will repay you for the years the locusts have eaten, the great locust and the young locust, the other locusts and the locust swarm, my great army that I sent among you. You will have plenty to eat until you are full, and you will praise the name of the Lord your God, who has worked wonders for you. Never again will my people be shamed. Then you will know that I am in Israel, that I am the Lord your God, and that there is no other. Never again will my people be shamed. And afterward I will pour out my Spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy, your old men will dream dreams, your young men will see visions. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my Spirit in those days. I will show wonders in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and billows of smoke. The sun will be turned to darkness, and the moon to blood, before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. For on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there will be deliverance, as the Lord has said, among the survivors whom the Lord calls.